All right, welcome to AP European History Unit 6 review. Going to try something completely new, like I've been doing kind of all unit. But this time the review is going to be nothing but maps. I'm not promising you there'll be a map on the test, but I'm telling you right now there's going to be a map on the test. So we're gonna talk about kind of the major themes of Unit 6 using these maps, and talk about hopefully most of the important things that you'll need to know. Certainly you'll want to review your notes and other things we've done. But let's start with where we started this unit, with the Industrial Revolution. And we even used this very map right here. You may recognize it, showing the areas of heavy industrialization. We started by talking about, before we really even got into what it was, we talked about where it started. And we talked about, so here you've got the United Kingdom up here in the darker brown, where you have urbanization of 20% or more. Because of industrialization, we talked about all the various factors that could have been part of that. Was it their empire bringing in raw materials and providing markets as their empire grew and grew and grew? Certainly that may have been a part of it. Was it their access to the sea with many ports? Was it all of the natural resources, the coal and iron that were already there and relatively easily accessible? Were those elements of it? Were perhaps they actually just super smart? I'm drawing a smart guy here. Oh, he now has a German helmet from World War I. I don't know how that got on there, but we'll put. I don't know how to fix that. It's going to be, there you go. I made it into a cross. So he was it the Enlightenment? Was it Enlightenment ideals? Was it the advent? There's a crown. Was it the fact that they had stable government since the Glorious Revolution, and government that was by and largely fair and gave a lot of individual freedom to the people? Then we got into the actual Industrial Revolution and talked about some of the various things that are going to happen. It starts with textiles, the textile industry. It goes from one form of production that was generally household production, the putting out system of form of production, that then transformed to factory production, and then from human power ultimately to water power, and then to steam power powered by coal. From there, the Industrial Revolution spread out, much like the Black Death had spread out from the Mediterranean. It's going to spread out into places like Belgium, will be a major source of that. Western Prussia, or the German Empire, over here in the Ruhr Valley. We talked about the Ruhr Valley. France will also industrialize fairly rapidly. Parts of Eastern Prussia as well. So it spreads out. In some areas, it spreads rather rapidly. In others, there are things holding it back. And kind of the further south and east you went away from Great Britain, the worse it was. Unless you were going to Ireland, in which case it was probably on par with what you would find in much of Russia. That is, very little industrialization. Because we talked about how much the British cared. Now, industrialization leads to all kinds of changes, both positive and others threatening to the way life normally had been. Urbanization leads to rising levels of pollution, problems of big cities. You have to start bringing in police and doing criminal justice reform, fire departments, sewage systems, fresh water systems. It leads to alienation of people, going from the old system where you might live in a small village of 100 people to now living in a huge city of 1 million people. It's easy to get lost in that kind of system. And many critics notice that things are changing and that something important is being lost with this Industrial Revolution. You've got the Romantic poets and artists kind of looking back to this bucolic past of green pastures and churches and meadows, and farmers plowing their fields, to now this ugly, disgusting landscape transformed, making men into machines, and they were disturbed by that. But it wasn't just poets and artists. You had people like our good friend Karl Marx. Here he is over here. But he doesn't, I don't know why I just gave him 4 arms, but he's got 4 arms. he's not able to spend a lot of time in Germany because he gets in trouble with the law a lot. So he spends some time throughout Europe, but it's only natural that he would rise up in an industrialized country. He doesn't rise in Russia or Austria, where they weren't having these issues of industrialization. He rises there and comes up with his theories of history based upon science, and argues that it's inevitable that that history is driven by economic forces, and those economic forces will ultimately lead to conflict between classes. And the feudal system was replaced by the capitalistic system. The capitalistic system will be replaced by a communist revolution, finally giving the power to the people. All right, so that's kind of the Industrial Revolution in a nutshell, all the big pictures of that. And on to the next big issue is conservatism and the Congress of Vienna. So after Napoleon, all the great monarchs and leaders of Europe were deeply, deeply concerned that France not be allowed to do what they had done. That France had taken over Spain, Portugal, Italy, Austria, beaten up on Prussia, the Netherlands, large portions of Russia. At one point in their system, pretty much all of continental Europe was either bending the knee or directly under control of Napoleon or one of his relatives. So how can they make sure that doesn't happen again? The Congress of Vienna is driven by this idea of balance of power. They did not hugely punish France. France lost really almost little in terms, very little in terms of territory, but they will create the country of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which will not last long because the Belgians weren't on board with this. But the idea is that New France, for a couple hundred years, had always picked on the Netherlands, whether it was Louis XIV, who was always trying to pick off portions of Belgium and to bring it and make it part of France, that it was too weak. Between Luxembourg, Belgium, Netherlands, they needed something stronger. So creating a single kingdom out of that area, they thought would protect that northern region from French incursions. The German Confederation will be created. The idea is Austria will kind of lead this up, kind of as a super team of Germans against the French. Spain, there'll be a restoration of the monarchy in Spain, so the king is back. And in France, there'll be a restoration of the monarchy because the conservatives, led by our good old friend Metternich, here he is here. He only has one arm. I'm not sure why. So Metternich is, his goal is to preserve the Austrian Empire at whatever cost it is. And the way he sees that is by not rocking the boat, by protecting the status quo. That strong monarchies protect order. And we talked about this for a couple hundred years now. There's an idea that strong government protects order. You can go back to Leviathan and the idea that, again, a strong government keeps the people from chaos. So the way he saw it, you have strong monarchies now in every country, except for Great Britain, which had a weak one. And Italy, he didn't mind keeping Italy weak because Austria has its own goal. And you can see as they pick up a good chunk of northern Italy. Italians didn't like this, but what were they going to do? Italy didn't have a country. They weren't a country. They were two kingdoms, Piedmont, Sardinia, and Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. All right, so that's the idea. You keep a balance of power and then see what happens. And the surprising thing to most, at least to me as a student of European history, is that it worked. That it was kind of this first effort at creating a transnational organization to keep the peace. So shortly after there was a revolution in Spain, the monarch had promised some things. He went back on those. The people rose up against him. And Metternich managed to have France invade, put down the rebellion, and protect the monarch. And then when it was over, several years later, the French left. And what did they gain out of it? Nothing, other than keeping the peace. There'll be a similar issue. There'll be an attempted revolution in 1848, or actually before that, in Italy. And Austria will go in and crush that. The Poles will rise up in rebellion in the Kingdom of Poland. And troops from Russia and Austria will go in and crush that one. So every time something percolates up as a threat to this order, they're able to arrange
without upsetting the balance of power to put that down. So, and this is going to be an era of revolutions. The French have a revolution in 1830, they have one in 1848, and every time they have a revolution, everybody else has a revolution. Except for Great Britain, which avoids all of these revolutions. We'll talk about that in a second. All of the revolutions fail, with the exception of the French ones, and the exception of a couple of wars of independence. So the French Revolution in 1830, they replaced their monarch. In 1848, they replaced their monarch with a republic, and eventually with Napoleon III. Everywhere else, these types of revolutions, whether liberal or radical, mostly liberal or nationalistic, will fail. The couple of successes in these revolutions, besides France, will be Greece, which will fight a long battle against the Ottoman Empire for its independence. And it's really complex why they were able to get away with that. Most people, especially Metternich, was like, no, this is a really bad idea. This is right in Austria's backyard. All of this area we already know is lots of mixed religion, nationality, ethnicities. The thing holding them together had been the strong Ottoman Empire. But now the Greeks were rising up. And if the Greeks get the idea that we can rise up and have our own country, why not other groups? So Metternich wasn't a huge fan of it, but Russia saw opportunities with a weak Ottoman Empire because Russia's always wanted that warm water port. The British were deeply interested in it, in part because they were building an empire across the Mediterranean in terms of trade routes to India. And there was the romantic appeal of fighting for the birthplace of democracy. And ultimately, Greece will get its independence, but ultimately, a conservative monarch will be put in power there, and it will not end up being a threat to the European order. Belgium will break away from the Netherlands and say, you know what, we're Catholic and we're not Dutch, so goodbye. Again, this one probably should not have succeeded, but all the other countries were busy with other revolutions in other places, so there was nothing really available to go and put that one down. And they had some strong support from countries like Great Britain, who had traditionally good trading relations with Belgium, and there were real opportunities for more trading opportunities there if Belgium were to break away. Other things in this time period, we'll see the German Zollverein, the free trade area. So Prussia didn't dominate the German Confederation at first. That'll be Austria. But Prussia will create a free trading zone called the Zollverein in order to create this liberal economy where there's no tariffs in between the different parts of the Zollverein, mostly German northern states, which will start bringing them closer and closer to Prussia as opposed to Austria. All right. In terms of wars, there won't be, like I said, it works. There's no major wars. There's a lot of little revolutions. There's a lot of little wars of independence. There's a lot of little wars, but we don't see the Napoleonic type war, a war that is devastating to a whole generation or two generations of Europeans. And good job, Congress of Vienna and Metternich. All right, on to nationalism. We've talked a little bit about it already, reviewing the Greek Revolution and the Belgian Revolution, both inspired by nationalistic impulses. Well, part of that is ultimately going to be a huge problem for places like Austria. This is a map from 1910, right before World War I, when they outlined the predominant racial categories, because they were absolutely obsessed with this in the early part of the 20th century, because race was everything. It was the new science. So it doesn't mean that these colors are exclusively German. It just means they are the largest, the plurality in that region. So they may not be the majority. They're the largest group, however. Austria, which is the headquarters of the German Empire, Vienna being kind of their seat of power, German. But most of it's not German. So they have a German ruler, a German dynasty, an Austrian dynasty, but not a German empire. Problem spots will be all over the place. Hungary had been a problem for a very long time. The Hungarian nobles were always pushing back against the Austrian monarchs. They had been rising in revolution for several times. They had gotten to the point where they were essentially a dual monarchy, that the monarch was the emperor of Austrian Empire, but he was the king of Hungary and the king of Austria, essentially. It wasn't one country. It was multiple countries patched together by a single monarch. Tyrrell, you may remember we talked about our good friend the Hoffer, who during the Napoleonic Wars had been executed, and while being executed by the authorities, he essentially gave the order to have himself shot. He was a revolutionary Jerry. He was fighting for Tyrol remaining part of the Austrian Empire because he saw it as a German region. It should not be carved off and put somewhere else. Well, Tyrol is going to be a problem spot. It's going to be one of the causes of World War I. It's why Italy fights against Austria in World War I is because Italy, by World War I, will have created their own nation, except for a few places like South Tyrol, also some places along the Dalmatian coast, which they consider to be part of Italia Irredenta, the irredeemed Italy. It's truly part of Italy. And they were promised by the Allies that they would get to take these places if they joined and fought against Austria. In other areas, you see, you see the Poles, who, if you recall, this has been part of one of the three partitions. Austria got a good chunk of Poland. You've got Ukrainians, who are always being ruled by someone else. You've got Romanians. You've got the Croats and Serbs, Slovenes, and the Czechs up here, all of whom had aspirations of creating their own nation, because this is the era in which nationhood becomes a defining characteristic of what makes a country. Before, what unified a country was oftentimes the persona of the monarch. Louis XIV said, "I am the state." Well, by the 19th century, it's not, when you say "I am the state," it is "I, the German people, am the state." There's a redefinition of what makes a nation, and that comes from a study of ethnicity, language, history, shared history, etc. And that definition is one we're still wrestling with today. Certainly for the United States, it's deeply complicated by the fact that we are a nation that has had immigrants from every corner of the world. So can we really be, maybe our nationality is just immigrant. Our nationality is we are immigrants, and that's who we are. But issues of immigration do not go away, because if your nation has values based upon your history and your language, then won't it change your shared history if you bring in people who are different? Or if there are people who live there who are already different, who live a separate, so you will see the rise of ethnic hatred that had kind of probably been percolating there before, but now they have a stronger rationale for hating people. So rise of anti-Semitism. This is by the late 19th century, where the Jewish people who kind of lived separately in Europe will get the idea, well, maybe we need our own nation. Maybe we need to create something for ourselves. This will not be the only place with issues of nationalism. Just about every large country had multiple nationalities. Spain, still to today, has multiple issues. Italy, when it gets created as a country, will have huge issues between northern and southern Italy. In many places in Italy, there's still a lot of regional loyalty as opposed to national loyalty. Various parts of Italy have considered breaking away. In Belgium, there's a breakaway group today who wants to break away from there. Scotland would perhaps like to break away from Great Britain now and join the EU. Ireland will have their beginnings of revolutionary nationalism starting during this time period. So this is going to be a very dominating time of nationalism, one that we're sticking with today, and we still wrestle with what makes a nation a nation. Can a nation have multiple languages? I mean, the EU is a grand experiment in the idea that you can have a multilingual, multinationality, multi-ethnicity, multi-religion state and still get along. It didn't work out for Austria-Hungary. Can it work out for the EU? There will still be a lot of fallout we'll see from the coronavirus and how various countries did or did not help others in the EU. So that's one of the big stories. It will be it's really the background for the rise of Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini and the fascists. I mean, when you think about the Nazis, were called the National Socialist Party. That was neither one of those terms were accidental. National Socialist Party. That issue of national identity was very important to the Nazis, and their desire to eliminate, to take a map that looks like the one in front of you and make it one color, because then they felt that one color would be strength. And if you recall, the symbol of fascism is a bundle of sticks put together so that the single stick is easily broken, but all the sticks put together, it looks like this. And then there's usually an axe on the top, and then a Roman legionnaire would carry it. That's a Roman legionnaire. He's very long-legged. But anyways, this bundle of sticks was called the fasces. It became a very common symbol in the 19th century. But that idea that unity creates strength. Now, the way Americans traditionally look at that is each of those sticks is individual. It's a different type of thing. They're not all identical sticks. The way European fascists will see it is all the sticks are the same. They're kind of interchangeable, as long as they're all German or all Italian. All right, so that is nationalism. One thing we didn't really get to, but it's a fun thing to kind of talk about here at the end, is Spain, if you recall, had a worldwide empire going into the Napoleonic Wars. Then Napoleon came and overthrew the Spanish king and put his brother on the throne, Napoleon's brother on the throne, and that left, this is Latin America in 1800, from Colorado down to Patagonia. All right, are they going to be loyal to this French dude who has taken over Spain? No, they're not. So they are essentially going to, all of these Spanish colonies will run themselves while Napoleon's brother is in charge. And then when Napoleon's brother is overthrown and the monarchy is restored, they got to figure out what to do. And we know it's a little dangerous, one, to give colonies a time of freedom. Remember in America, there was salutary neglect. They got used to running their own affairs. So now the monarch's going to come in and I'm going to take control again. I'm your king. And they kind of waited to see what would happen and ultimately decided they didn't like it. In addition, they also caught a little bit of this nationalism bug. And really, a lot of what nationalism comes down to is self-determination. Do you get to determine as a people what your government is going to be? And they didn't like the idea. So by 1830, almost all of these will have had revolutions against the Spanish, and of course Brazil. They will have had a revolution against Portugal. And you can see what is left of the Spanish Empire. Not very much. They'll keep some islands over here. There'll be a British colony here, a Dutch colony here, a French colony here, and again some islands here. But the rest of it has broken away and created new nations based upon liberal constitutions, except for Brazil, which actually had a monarchy because the Portuguese monarchy decided to kind of move there for a little while. So those revolutions, an important part of the disintegration of the Spanish Empire, both nationalistic and liberal, and some of them a little radical. But that is the story of nationalism in the New World. So those are probably the biggest picture things. Make sure you review what the different isms believed in: conservatism, liberalism, romanticism, nationalism, some other isms I feel like I'm leaving out. Hope this is helpful for you, and that is your Unit 6 review using nothing but maps.